This is a perfect representation of my wife. It's Thursday night, the kids just went down, and this is how I find her. What are you doing now?
I was trying to work out.
What are you listening to?
Rachel Hollis' new book.
What'd you think?
Boo.
Did she see it coming?
She for sure saw it coming.
She definitely saw it coming.
She definitely saw it coming.
Pop Psych, and here's why. It stands for Popular Psychology, and through YouTube, I will become popular, and I'll be a popular psychologist. I'm David Colarosi. No, it's Dr. David Colarosi. I have a master's degree in marriage and family therapy and a PhD in counseling psychology.
You are such a genius.
Okay, it's a big day. I finally finished Rachel Hollis's new book. So the book just came out this week. I rushed to pick it up, and I didn't like it. And I got a feeling that not very many people are going to like it. So I thought a lot about how do I present this to you and not be unfair to her. I think that everybody's going to read this book and they are going to give it a negative review online. I don't want to just add to the pile of people saying that it's not good. And yet that is what I'm going to do. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to give you what I think was good about the book, and then I'll give a more critical review, and then at the very end, I'll talk about the Rachel and Dave divorce debacle, which she discussed in the book and which pissed me off in the book. So that will be a fun sort of teaser at the end. Okay, so the good parts about the book. I thought that her approach to the concept of showing up was really good. So she talks about how in her life, when her brother died, her brother committed suicide, her parents were so invested in their loss, they were grieving so much that they weren't able to take care of Rachel and her siblings. And she talks about how the years and years after that, 4 years after that, she still would suffer on holidays because her parents weren't able to really connect with the kids anymore. She felt like her parents just gave up on her. And she talks a lot about how painful that was. And then she urges her audience, look, if you're grieving, you still have to worry about the people that depend on you. And I thought the way that she put that chapter together was fantastic. It was authentic, it was vulnerable. I cared about her in that chapter. I bought it in that chapter, and I thought that the message was really good. And so for me, as someone that does executive coaching, if I were working with someone who was struggling with that issue, I would want them to read that particular chapter. I also thought that the last chapter of the book, which is about hope, it's about Rachel giving her own experience, sharing about her experience with her brother, and talking about the value of life and how even though we go through painful moments, it's worth living. And the people that aren't able to live, that aren't able to be here, they miss a lot. And so I thought she did a good job of imploring the audience to have hope for the future. And again, I thought that chapter was fantastic, and that's a chapter I would recommend. And so you'll notice that the two chapters I would recommend both include Rachel. They both include her being vulnerable and transparent about her own experiences. But other than those two chapters, the book was essentially void of that kind of depth. This was marketed as a grief book. Rachel shared that because of her past experiences with trauma, that she wanted to be the audience's, I think she used the term grief Sherpa, right? That requires some depth. But instead, this book included, advice about how to manage your money, advice about how to stay physically fit, how to eat more healthy despite trauma. Maybe you should start a gratitude journal. I mean, essentially just basic cognitive behavioral interventions, right? Which she discussed in her book, Girl, Wash Your Face, and in her other book, Girl, Stop Apologizing, and now it's in this book. And it just feels like she's recycling the same content, so redundant, not interesting, and not near the depth that you need to be at for a book about grief. So that's kind of my big issue, is that this is not a deep enough book to really cover grief, bereavement, trauma. You can't approach that as a motivational speaker, right? It's a different vibe, and I think in the wrong hands, this can be dangerous. So imagine she's trying to cover her entire audience. That audience includes people that may have lost their children, they could have lost a child 3 weeks ago, and it could also include someone who got passed over for a promotion 4 months ago. The messaging to those two people are very different, or they should be very different. The expectations should be very different. The experience is very different. And you take this book, and without any sort of understanding of that or discussion of that or flexibility around that, this book is sort of like a manual for here are the things that help me get through grief, and here are the things that you should do to go about that. And again, I thought that just came across as tone deaf and could be potentially dangerous. I am worried that the audience of this book, someone going through grief, will read the book and they'll think, I'm grieving wrong. And that, the mental health community would tell you, is the biggest concern. Everybody grieves in a different way, and that should be allowed. Rachel talks about Elizabeth Kubler-Ross and her work, and the different stages of grief, and the different stages of grief. And we know now that we don't walk through those stages of grief in an orderly manner, right? We cycle through them, we go back and forth, they're out of order. It's different for everybody. This book felt too prescriptive, and I think missed the mark. So now to the divorce part. This part, so I'm not super invested in Rachel and Dave's marriage. I don't really care. But reading this book, I felt so annoyed with her description of that, or sort of what I would describe as density around why her audience would be frustrated. She says very clearly, I don't feel guilty because I don't want my kid to grow up thinking that my relationship with Dave is healthy. I don't want them to emulate that relationship. And at the same time, she seems to not understand why her audience would feel like they were misled. Well, it's like Rachel, your audience spends thousands of dollars to go to your conferences. They spend hundreds of dollars on your books. They listen to your podcasts. You have these huge events. You bring in speakers from all over the place, and people attend because they want to emulate the relationship you have with Dave. But that same relationship you're trying to protect your kids from. How do you not see that that's insincere? I wish that she and Dave, for that matter, would just come out and say, look, we got out over our skis. We had a business behind our relationship. We tried really hard to make it work. We thought we could pull it around. And as we didn't know what to do. We misled you. We should have told you earlier, and we're sorry. But I have yet to hear her say that. She doesn't say it in this book. In fact, I would argue she takes it sort of a different stance. And to me, it's silly. I don't know why she's not willing to make that apology. So that was my impression. In the comments, please let me know your thoughts. Thanks.